Hello, today we're going to make an Einkorn crust. This is going to be a single layer crust so you can make it for your coconut cream pie or banana cream pie. Start off with 1 1/3 cups of Einkorn flour, add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Just mix it a little bit with the pastry blender. Then it calls for 6 tablespoons of butter. You want the butter to be cold, and I like to cut it up into small sizes because it blends more quickly that way. So I cut it up into pieces even smaller than a tablespoon each. And throw that in there. And with your pastry blender, just cut it in. Have a knife with you so that you can clear off the blender and cut in some more. Just a little bit more butter here. And you want to blend until you get as close to small pebbles as possible. So you can see where we are, and you still need a little bit more to make it a little bit more consistent or homogeneous. If you have any big clumps of butter, cut those in, blend them in to make them a little bit smaller. Okay. Then you're going to take 3 tablespoons of cold water. I like that to be ice cold, so I take my 3 tablespoons of water, put it in the freezer for a while, then bring it out before it's frozen. So this is very cold, but not ice. Normally, with a pie crust, you would just gently blend that in until it kind of forms a ball. But this recipe actually calls for you to squeeze it. So I'm going to blend it first with the fork. It gets to about this point. And then I'm going to squeeze it in my hands so that it all comes together. Again, usually with a crust, you don't want to overwork it. For some reason with this Einkorn, it doesn't really matter. It's still going to come out very well. So you can see it's getting closer to being one piece. And when I've made a ball, I'm going to put it in stretch tight or saran wrap, cling film, and then you're going to put it in the refrigerator for 15 minutes. So you can see it's almost a ball. I'm just going to put that in my cling wrap and put it in the refrigerator. I'll see you in 15 minutes. Okay, it's been 15 minutes. Just have to turn my light on. And it's a bit cold, and it's in the shape of a ball, but it's not so hard that you won't be able to roll it out easily. To roll this out, I have put down first some cling wrap on the bottom and then a piece of parchment paper. Now put the ball of dough on this, and then you could cover this with the plastic wrap and then kind of just mush it down so that you can get a large disc before you start to use the rolling pin. With this Einkorn flour, it wants to crumble apart. So if you keep the plastic wrap on it, you'll be able to prevent that pretty much. Now you can either remove that wrap and do a top roll of parchment, which is what I'm going to try here, and then start rolling it out with the rolling pin. So start from the center and go outward, come back to the center, roll toward you, and then I just flip it so that I'm always doing that. And you'll be able to see the dough underneath the parchment, and just roll it out until it's fairly thin and the diameter is big enough so that it'll fit into your pie pan. And every so often you can pull apart the parchment and see how it's working. The parchment is also great because it will save you cleanup. You don't have to use flour on it. And it allows you to work with this einkorn dough a lot more easily than if you just had it on a mat with some flour and then just used your rolling pin. You're definitely going to want this to be less than 1/4 of an inch thick, closer to 1/8, I would say. So it's getting pretty thin, but I still want some more. So I'm going to keep rolling it out. The parchment will also make it easier for when I want to put it in the pie pan. Take another look. Flip it over. So now you can see how thin it is. Now I'm going to take my pie pan, which is a 9-inch. I'm just going to put it in like this with the parchment on the bottom and the top. Kind of shape it in there, but it's going to go in the refrigerator again. And it really should go in about ½ an hour, which allows the gluten to rest. And that way it won't shrink up as much when you're cooking it. And this particular recipe just makes enough for the 1 9-inch, so you don't have a lot of dough left over. And also by refrigerating it ½ an hour, this parchment will come off more easily and the dough will stay in one piece. So I'm going to put that in the fridge for ½ an hour and then we'll be back. While we're waiting for the pie crust to cool in the refrigerator, we're going to make the pudding that's going to form the coconut cream for the pie. Today, however, I'm actually going to do a twist on it and use banana, but we'll get to that later. To start off with, in a nice pot, you're going to add 1 1/4 cups of heavy cream and a ½ cup of milk and 1 can of coconut milk. Now, even though I'm going to be adding banana later, I think the flavor of the coconut milk will be fantastic. Heat this just a medium or low to medium heat. And it's going to be cooked until small bubbles start to form on the outside. In other words, you don't want it to get to a boiling point. It's just going to be scalded. It's important that you not overcook it, otherwise it'll be burned. And if it's undercooked, the pudding will fall apart. So I tend to watch it pretty closely, and I don't heat it quickly. So it takes, I would say, probably at least 10 minutes for me to get it to the point where the small bubbles are formed around the outside there. While we're waiting for that, though, we can put together the next part of the recipe. This is 2/3 of a cup of sugar, and I'm going to add 1/3 cup of flour. Again, it's the Einkorn flour. So if you have somebody who's gluten sensitive, they probably can tolerate the Einkorn, and the Crust is Einkorn. So it's just fitting that the pudding be made with Einkorn as well. So just whisk the two of those together, and then we will add eggs. 4 egg yolks plus 1 full egg. Mix that together with these ingredients. I broke one of the eggs in there, so get a bit of that out. And just whip this up into a nice paste. Once the milks have scalded, we're going to slowly incorporate the milk into this. By doing it slowly, it's called tempering, the eggs won't turn into scrambled eggs. And then when everything's mixed, we put it back into the saucepan, and we'll be whisking constantly until it's thickened. And you'll see that momentarily. So that looks very nice. It's not lumpy. You want to make sure there are no lumps. Although we will be using the sieve later, so any lumps that are there will be eradicated because they're not going to go through the sieve. All right. This will still be a few minutes, so I'm just going to pause here, and we will come back once we're at the scalded stage. Okay, we're back, and we don't quite have bubbles, but you can see that there's a bit of a skin forming at the top, which means that we're getting close. I'm not going to move it too much. While we're waiting for that, because we're so close, for those of you making the coconut cream pie, take a saucepan and put on low-medium heat, and then take a cup of sweetened shredded coconut. I think that the bigger flakes are better. I only have a thinner flake, but that's okay. Just put it in the saucepan, and you're just going to watch it. It will brown. At first, it'll be quite slow, but then it browns quickly. Again, you don't want to burn it, so just watch it. Not every flake's going to get brown. Some of them will be white, but overall, they'll be toasted, and it'll taste delicious. You'll end up putting 3/4 of that in the coconut cream pudding and reserving 1/4 to top it when you have the whipped cream later. So again, we're getting close here, but no bubbles yet. Very close though. Okay, little bubbles are starting to form, and I've got the skim coat or the skin. So I'm going to take it and slowly incorporate it into the eggs, and I'm whisking the whole time. Now, it'd be great if your bowl just stayed still. Mine's moving a little bit, but that's okay. I'm sure to whisk fairly vigorously. all in there. Just going to clean my bowl. And then we're going to pour it all back. There are no scrambled eggs. And then I'm just going to whisk. I now have the heat kind of on medium. It's still a little bit on the low side of medium. And we'll just whisk until it starts to thicken. Again, this will take a few minutes. You don't want it to burn. You want to make sure that your whisk goes in the corners, if I can call it that, and the bottom, so that nothing forms at the bottom, because that won't taste good in the pudding. The coconut has not yet started to brown, so just keep that there. The best time to make this pie is probably in the morning if you can. And you want the crust to be cooked first. And you want it to have time to cool down, because you don't really want to put the pudding into a hot crust. It's better, I think, if it's at room temp. And then the pudding goes in and it's going to chill for 4 hours at least. If you make it in the morning, you can chill it for 4 hours. If you make it at night, it can chill overnight. And the last thing you're going to do is put the whipped cream on. And we'll get to that later. I can feel slightly that it's starting to thicken. Every once in a while, you can stop just to see if it has started to boil. You'll get a big bubble that comes up. So this hasn't started to boil yet. And you can see where my flame is. It's really not even medium. And that's because I just hate the idea of possibly burning something. However, the coconut has started to brown. It's basically done, actually. So I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to get back to my stirring here. It's just starting to bubble up here. So now, let me just let it go a little bit more because I want it to bubble in the middle. It's pretty good. Okay, that's good. Now we're going to vigorously stir for 30 seconds. 1, 2. feel it just needs a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, that should be well done. Now I'm going to pour it into this bowl through the sieve. Just don't want my sieve to fall. And it's going to. It's all coming through very well. And there really aren't any lumps. But you can just smush it down a bit. And then you will probably see a little bit of lump in there. But by doing this, you'll have a lovely smooth pudding. And there's a little bit more in here, but I don't know if I can get it. Just put it at the bottom. And at this point, you really have a really nice vanilla pudding, although it's made with coconut milk, so obviously there's some coconut. So scrape all of that pudding that's on the outside of the sieve to get that in. Great. Now it calls for a half teaspoon of salt and it really calls for a quarter teaspoon of vanilla, but I really like the vanilla flavor so much, I make it a half teaspoon, which, let's face it, is not a lot. So I'm going to add that. Oops. It smells really nice. Now at this point, you would also add 3/4 cup of the toasted coconut. I'm going to add about the equivalent of some banana. It was really just one banana, and I cut it into smaller pieces. But I think I'll add some of the coconut anyway. So it'll be a coconut and banana cream pie. And the flavors go together so well, why not do it? If you feel as though you've burned your coconut, just throw it out and start again, because you don't want to ruin the whole pudding. And the coconut's pretty inexpensive and it's quick enough to do. So it's not a big problem to redo it. I think I did that the first time. Okay. We've got 4 more minutes before I'm ready to take that crust out, and we'll see you then. All right, it's been half an hour, so I've taken this pie crust out. Now, in baking the pie crust, I recommend that you take a baking sheet to put under the pie pan. because if some of that crust falls off, you don't want it going into the bottom of your oven because it'll smell terrible. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is take off the top parchment. And you still have to take it off gingerly because the einkorn does want to stick. Take off the bottom one. And you know what? The thing of this is, it won't really matter if you keep that bottom crust, the bottom parchment, because you can always remove it once this thing is cooked. So I'm just going to cut around it so we don't have too much of the paper. I just came up with this, so we'll see if it ends up being an ingenious tool or something that backfires. Now this little bit is the only part that really kind of hangs over. I'm going to just piece some right back on, just to make it about as even around as possible. Now, then you want to put some parchment on top of this. Of course, I already had it on there, so I could have kept it, but I've just got a round parchment I'm going to put in there. And to weigh that down so that the center of the crust doesn't bubble up, you should put pie weights if you have them. If you don't have them, you can use dried beans or even rice. Now, I've got two different types. One is this string, which I recently got. And then I have these ceramic balls. And both work well. So that should keep a nice flat shape. Now I'm going to put it in a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes, and we'll see how brown it is at that point. Again, don't overcook, so maybe check it at 25, but it should be 30 to 35. Whoops. And I told you to put it on this, and I didn't, so I'll put it back on that. Go to 25-minute timer. We'll check back with you then. And we're back. It's been 25 minutes, and I think my pie crust is done. Luckily, none of the crust fell. And you can see it's browned, but not overly brown. So the test will be when I remove the ceramic balls and the chain to see what the bottom crust looks like. If I feel it needs a little bit more cooking, I'll put it back in for a few minutes. So let's take a look. They'll be very hot, so I just use a spoon and spoon out the ceramic balls. And the chain will come out in one piece. No burns. Take a look. Oh, it looks really good, actually. So that's done. And now it just has to cool. Once it gets cooled to room temperature, then we'll put the pudding in it. So I'll put it on just on the stove top, or you can put it on a cooling rack. And it may only take 30 to 60 minutes for that to cool. So once that's down to room temp, we'll come back and fill the pie. See you then. We are back. This is done cooling. It's down to room temperature. So I'm going to put the rack away. I was able to lift the crust out by the parchment paper, and I can now separate the parchment paper away from that crust. And if it'll come off the bottom, I'll just put my hand under it, and look, it comes out in one piece, and I'll put it back in the pie pan. So now we are done with the parchment paper. But even if you had kept the parchment in, it would have been fine. It just wouldn't have looked as good. And just make sure you don't eat the parchment paper. All right, now I'm going to fill the pie crust with the pudding. It's coming right out. It smells great. I'll just spread that around to the ends of the crust. I'm going to refrigerate this. I'm not going to put a plastic wrap on it, but I will probably put a tent over it just so it doesn't absorb any flavors that may be in the refrigerator. So since I'm making this at night, it'll refrigerate overnight, and then tomorrow morning we'll make the whipped cream to top it off with. If you were to make this earlier in the day, you need to cool it at least 4 hours. So I'll see you tomorrow morning when we add the whipped cream. Hi, and we're back. Now you can see that the pie has chilled overnight. It's nice and solid. To make the whipped cream, I recommend 1.5 cups of heavy cream, and then 4 tablespoons of confectionery sugar, which is equivalent to 1/4 cup. I'm going to put in 1/2 tablespoon of cornstarch to stabilize the whipped cream, because my pie is not all going to be eaten at one time, so the whipped cream will tend to separate. I will also add 1 tablespoon of vanilla to give it more delicious flavor, and the vanilla also tends to make it separate more, so the cornstarch is important. But I think that 1/2 tablespoon of cornstarch will not impart a flavor of cornstarch. I really think that a tablespoon does, and that's not a good flavor. So I'm now going to whip this until it's pretty stiff, and you'll see me in a moment. We're back with the whipped cream, and you can tell how stiff it is. I also just want to comment on, when you refrigerate this pie to get it to set, do not cover it, because that will tend to lead to condensation, and then you'll have some wetness on the top of the pie, which you don't want. So just spoon out all the whipped cream on the top of the pie. And then take an offset spatula, which is one of my favorite tools, along with tongs, and kind of frosting the pie. So spread out the whipped cream. You want to make sure it goes to the ends, and just do it about as evenly as possible. Okay. Now take the rest of your toasted coconut and decorate the top. The einkorn flour makes a crust that will stay crunchy somehow, even if you have this, 2 or 3 days. Okay, so this is what the final pie looks like, and we'll cut a piece. The first piece is notoriously difficult to get out. Cut through that again. Oh my God, it's beautiful. So look at that pie. And that. So there you have a banana coconut cream pie. Or if you want to leave out the bananas, just a coconut cream pie. Enjoy.